The morning sun cut through the dust clouds rising from the Mojave Desert, painting everything gold and copper as engines roared to life across the vast expanse of hard-packed earth. The annual Desert Thunder Rally had drawn riders from 17 states, their chrome machines gleaming like metal warriors lined up for battle. This was not just a race. This was a proving ground where reputations were built or destroyed in the span of 3 brutal hours across 120 miles of unforgiving terrain. Maya Johnson stood beside her motorcycle, a 1987 Honda XR600R that looked like it had survived 3 wars and a few more personal battles. The paint was faded. Patches of rust decorated the frame like unintentional art, and the exhaust pipe was held together by what appeared to be equal parts welding skill and stubborn determination. She was 19 years old, 5'6", with braids pulled back tight beneath her helmet and hands that had spent more time covered in engine grease than most mechanics twice her age. Around her, the other riders were making final adjustments to machines that cost more than most people's cars. Titanium frames, custom suspension systems, engines that purred with the confidence of engineering perfection. And then there was Maya's bike, which didn't purr so much as growl like an old dog that refused to stay down. A group of riders gathered near the starting line, their laughter cutting through the engine noise like a blade. 3 men in matching leather vests, their club names stitched across the back in silver thread, Desert Kings. They had won this rally for 6 consecutive years, and their leader, a thick-necked man named Garrett Cole, had never finished lower than 3rd place in 15 years of desert racing. "Hey, look at this," one of them said, pointing toward Maya with the casual cruelty of someone who had never been on the receiving end of doubt. "Somebody let their mechanic's daughter borrow the shop bike." The laughter spread like wildfire across dry brush. Maya didn't look up. She was checking her tire pressure, her movements methodical and precise, as if the world around her had simply ceased to exist. Garrett walked over, his boots crunching against the gravel with deliberate weight. He was a man who had learned long ago that presence was half the battle, and he wielded it like a weapon. "Sweetheart," he said, loud enough for everyone within 50 feet to hear, "that bike won't last 20 miles out there. You should save yourself the embarrassment and head home while you still can." Maya finally looked up. Her eyes were calm, steady, like still water hiding a current strong enough to pull someone under. "I appreciate your concern," she said. "I really do. But my grandfather built this engine with his own hands 40 years ago. He rode it through terrain that would make this course look like a parking lot. And when he taught me to ride, he said something I never forgot." She paused, returning her attention to her bike. Garrett waited, annoyed that she had captured his attention. "What did he say?" "He said the race isn't between the bikes. It's between the riders. And riders are made of something you can't buy at a dealership." Before you continue with this story, check if you are already subscribed to this channel. These are the stories that remind us what courage looks like when the world tries to count you out. Subscribe now and be part of a community that believes in those who refuse to quit. The horn sounded at exactly 9 in the morning, and the desert exploded into motion. 47 motorcycles launched forward like a wave of thunder, each rider fighting for position in the chaos of the first straightaway. Dust rose in thick clouds, visibility dropping to near zero for anyone not at the front of the pack. This was where accidents happened, where the reckless and the unprepared were weeded out before the race truly began. Maya held back. She had studied the course for 3 months, mapping every turn, every incline, every section where the sand shifted from hardpack to soft treachery. She knew that the first 10 miles were designed to tempt riders into burning their engines hot, pushing machines beyond their limits in a desperate grab for early advantage. Her grandfather had taught her patience the way other parents taught multiplication tables, not as abstract theory, but as survival skill. "The desert doesn't care about your schedule," he used to say, his weathered hands wrapped around a coffee cup in their garage back in Bakersfield. "It doesn't care about your sponsors or your trophy case. The desert only respects those who respect it. Everyone else, it swallows whole." Raymond Johnson had been a legend in his own time, though few people outside California remembered his name anymore. He had raced motorcycles in an era when black riders weren't just rare, they were actively pushed out, their entries rejected, their tires slashed in parking lots, their victories questioned by officials who couldn't believe what they had witnessed. He never complained. He just kept winning until the trophies spoke louder than the prejudice. Maya carried that legacy with her like an invisible weight, not as burden but as fuel. By mile 15, the field had already begun to separate. The leaders were visible only as distant dust clouds, while the middle pack had settled into a rhythm of desperate survival. 3 riders had already dropped out, one with engine failure, another with a broken chain, and a third who had simply misjudged a turn and ended up 20 feet off course with a twisted front wheel. Maya was running in 23rd place, which was exactly where she wanted to be. The terrain shifted as the course wound through a narrow canyon, the walls rising on either side like nature's own arena. This was where the race got technical, where pure engine power meant nothing and skill became everything. The path twisted and turned, rocks jutting up like teeth waiting to snag the unwary. She watched the rider ahead of her, a young man on a brand new Yamaha, take a corner too wide, his expensive suspension system compensating for his poor line choice. He would make it through, but he had lost 3 seconds. And in this race, seconds were the difference between history and obscurity. Maya took the same corner tight, her body leaning at an angle that would have seemed reckless to anyone who didn't understand the physics of weight distribution. Her grandfather's engine growled beneath her, the sound familiar and reassuring, like a conversation between old friends. She passed the Yamaha rider without looking back. In the observation tent set up near mile marker 30, a group of sponsors and race officials watched the progress on mounted screens. Among them was a woman named Eleanor Price, a documentary filmmaker who had been tracking underground racing culture for the past 5 years. She had come to the Desert Thunder Rally expecting the usual story: men with too much money and too little sense, pushing machines to their limits for reasons that rarely went deeper than ego. What she found instead was a 19-year-old girl on a motorcycle older than she was, steadily climbing through the pack with a technique that bordered on artistry. "Who is that?" Eleanor asked, pointing at screen 3. The official beside her, a sun-weathered man named Marcus, squinted at the display. "Number 47, Maya Johnson. First time at the rally." "First time? She's riding like she knows this course better than the regulars." Marcus shrugged. "Some people are just naturals, I suppose. Though I gotta say, I was there when she registered. Half the guys in line laughed when they saw her bike. Called it a museum piece." Eleanor watched as Maya navigated a section of loose sand that had already claimed 2 other riders, her movements so fluid it looked almost choreographed. "Seems like the museum piece is doing just fine." The sun reached its apex as the race entered its most brutal phase, the 30-mile stretch known locally as the Devil's Backbone. The terrain here was a nightmare of sharp elevation changes, hidden drop-offs, and sand so soft in places that it could swallow a tire whole if you weren't careful. This was where races were won and lost. This was where Maya Johnson would prove whether she belonged. Garrett Cole was running in 3rd place, his custom-built KTM eating up the terrain with mechanical precision. He had been racing this course for 15 years, and he knew every rock, every ridge, every place where the desert tried to trick you into making a mistake. What he did not know was that the girl on the old Honda was now running in 9th place and gaining. His radio crackled, a communication system that connected him to his team back at the observation point. "Garrett, you've got someone coming up fast on your 6. Number 47. She's passed 5 riders in the last 10 miles. He almost laughed. Almost. But something in the information nagged at him, a splinter of doubt that he couldn't quite remove. "What's her split time through the canyon section?" A pause. Then, "Garrett, she ran it faster than you did." The laughter died in his throat. Maya didn't know about the radio chatter, and she wouldn't have cared if she did. Her world had narrowed to the 50 feet of terrain directly ahead, her mind processing thousands of micro-calculations per second: angle of approach, throttle position, weight distribution, surface composition. This was what her grandfather had called the zone, that mental state where thought and action became indistinguishable, where the bike stopped being a machine and became an extension of your own body. She remembered the first time she had experienced it, age 12, riding through the abandoned quarry near their home while her grandfather watched from the ridge above. She had been scared at first, overwhelmed by the power beneath her, certain that one wrong move would send her tumbling. Then something clicked. The fear didn't disappear. It transformed. It became focus. It became fuel. When she finished the run, her grandfather was waiting at the bottom, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. "How did that feel?" he asked. "Like flying," she said. "Like nothing could touch me." He nodded slowly. "That's the zone. Most riders never find it. They're too busy listening to the noise, their fear, their ego, other people's opinions. But you found it because you learned to quiet everything else." She had carried that lesson with her ever since. The devil's backbone began to take its toll. By mile 60, 8 more riders had dropped out, their machines pushed beyond their limits by the relentless terrain. The desert was proving what it always proved, that money and equipment could only carry you so far. The rest had to come from somewhere deeper. Maya moved into 6th place, then 5th, then 4th. The riders ahead of her were beginning to notice. They could hear the distinctive growl of her engine in their mirrors, a sound that didn't match the sleek hum of their modern machines. It was rougher, more primal, like something from a different era of racing entirely, which, of course, it was. At mile 75, Maya made her first significant move. The rider in 3rd place, a man named Vincent, who had finished 2nd the previous year, had taken a conservative line through a rocky section, choosing stability over speed. It was the smart play, the veteran play. Maya chose differently. She saw a gap on the left side, barely wider than her handlebars, where the rocks formed a natural channel. It was risky. One miscalculation would send her crashing into the boulders, but it was also faster. Much faster. She committed to the line without hesitation, her body shifting to navigate the narrow passage, her engine screaming as she threaded the needle between disaster and glory. 3 seconds later, she emerged on the other side in 3rd place. Vincent turned his head just enough to see who had passed him. The look on his face, visible even beneath his helmet visor, was pure disbelief. Back at the observation tent, Eleanor Price had abandoned all pretense of journalistic detachment. She was on her feet, leaning toward the screen like a fan at a playoff game. "Are you seeing this?" she said to no one in particular. "Are you all seeing this?" Marcus, the race official, was seeing it. So was everyone else in the tent. The girl on the 40-year-old Honda was now in podium position with 45 miles to go, and she was showing no signs of slowing down. "I've been running this race for 20 years, Marcus said quietly, "and I've never seen anything like this." The radio chatter among the remaining riders had shifted from casual updates to urgent warnings. The girl was coming. The girl with the old bike that wasn't supposed to last 20 miles was coming, and she was faster than anyone had expected. Garrett Cole pushed his machine harder, demanding everything it had to give. He was still in 2nd place, but the gap between himself and the leader, a rider named Thompson from Arizona, was growing. His focus was splitting between the terrain ahead and the threat behind, and in desert racing, split focus was the first step toward failure. "How far back is she?" he demanded into his radio. 800 meters and closing. She's averaging 3 seconds per mile faster than you through the technical sections. 3 seconds per mile. Over 45 miles, that was more than 2 minutes. More than enough to catch him. More than enough to beat him. For the first time in 15 years of racing, Garrett Cole felt something he had almost forgotten existed. He felt afraid. Maya crossed the mile 80 marker with her engine running hot but steady, the temperature gauge hovering just below the red line. This was the moment of truth, the final push where machines and riders alike were pushed to their absolute limits. She could see Garrett ahead of her now, not just as a dust cloud but as an actual figure on the horizon. He was riding well, better than she had expected, his experience evident in every calculated turn. But experience could only compensate for so much. And Maya had something he didn't. She had nothing to lose. The terrain flattened slightly as the course entered its final phase, a 15-mile sprint across open desert where pure speed would determine everything. This was supposed to be where the expensive bikes shined, where their superior engineering pulled away from the competition. Maya's grandfather had anticipated this moment when he built the engine 4 decades ago. "The desert sprint is where they'll try to beat you," he had told her, years before she was old enough to understand what he meant. "They'll think their machines are faster, and maybe they are on paper. But speed isn't just about horsepower. It's about efficiency. It's about knowing exactly what your engine can give you and never asking for more." She opened the throttle, and the old Honda responded like a horse finally given permission to run. The gap closed. 800 meters became 600. 600 became 400. The dust from Garrett's bike was no longer distant haze. It was close enough to taste. Garrett heard her before he saw her. That distinctive engine growl getting louder by the second, impossible to ignore. He pushed his throttle harder, demanding more from a machine that was already giving everything it had. But more wasn't enough. Maya pulled alongside him at mile 92. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, they rode parallel, two riders from two different worlds meeting on the same stretch of desert. She looked over at him. He looked back. And then she was gone, pulling ahead with a surge of acceleration that defied everything the racing community thought they knew about 40-year-old engines. The final 8 miles passed in a blur of speed and sand. Maya could see the finish line in the distance now, a bright banner stretched between two poles like a promise waiting to be kept. The crowd was visible too, people on their feet, though she couldn't hear their cheers over the roar of her engine. She crossed the line in second place. Thompson, the Arizona rider, had maintained his lead through superior equipment and a conservative strategy. He was already off his bike when Maya rolled to a stop, his face a mixture of triumph and something else, something that looked almost like relief that the girl hadn't caught him too. The crowd surged forward, but Maya barely noticed. She was looking at her bike, running her hand along the faded paint and rusted frame, feeling the heat radiating from an engine that had given her everything it had. "Thank you," she whispered. Though whether she was talking to the machine or to her grandfather's memory, she couldn't say. The celebration that followed was unlike anything the Desert Thunder Rally had seen before. Second place might not have been victory, but it was something rarer. It was proof. Proof that the race wasn't about the newest equipment or the biggest sponsors. Proof that respect wasn't given. It was earned. Proof that a 19-year-old girl on a 40-year-old bike could hold her own against the best riders in the country. Eleanor Price found Maya 30 minutes after the finish, sitting alone behind the medical tent with a bottle of water and a 1,000-yard stare. "Mind if I ask you a few questions?" Eleanor said. Maya looked up, her exhaustion evident but her eyes still sharp. "Depends on the questions." "Fair enough." Eleanor sat down beside her, not bothering with the pretense of professional distance. "I've been making documentaries about racing culture for 5 years. Covered 3 rallies, 2 cross-country events, and more small-town circuits than I can count. And I have never, not once, seen anyone ride the way you rode today." Maya was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My grandfather used to say that riding isn't about the bike. It's about what you're willing to give. Anyone can push an engine hard, but not everyone can listen to what the engine is telling them back." "Your grandfather was Raymond Johnson, wasn't he? The Raymond Johnson who won the California State Championship in 1978 on a bike he built himself?" Maya's eyes widened slightly, the first genuine surprise she had shown all day. "You know about him?" "I did my research when I saw your registration. There's not much written about him anymore, but what's there is impressive. He was ahead of his time in a lot of ways." "He was ahead of his time in every way." Maya's voice carried a weight that had nothing to do with fatigue. "And the world wasn't ready for him. He should have been famous. He should have been sponsored, celebrated, remembered. Instead, they made it so hard for him that he eventually just stopped. Stopped racing. Stopped competing. Spent the rest of his life in a garage in Bakersfield, teaching me everything he knew and pretending like the dreams he gave up didn't still haunt him." Eleanor was quiet for a moment, respecting the gravity of what Maya had shared. "He died 3 years ago," Maya continued. 2 months before I turned 17. Lung cancer. By the end, he couldn't even hold a wrench anymore. But he could still talk, still teach. And the last thing he said to me, right before he closed his eyes for the last time, was, "Finish what I started. Show them what we're made of." She looked down at her hands, still dirty from the race. "That's why I'm here. That's why I ride. Not for trophies or money or fame. I ride because every mile I cover on his bike is a mile he never got to ride. Every race I enter is a race they wouldn't let him compete in. And every person who doubted me today, who laughed at my bike or questioned whether I belonged, they're the grandchildren of the people who told him the same thing 50 years ago." Eleanor felt something shift in her understanding of the day's events. This wasn't just a race story. This was a generational reckoning, a debt being paid across decades. Would you be willing to tell that story on camera? She asked. Maya considered the question for a long moment. If it means people remember his name, she finally said, I'll tell it as many times as it takes. The Desert Kings found Maya an hour later, near the parking area where her truck was waiting. Garrett was at the front of the group, his earlier arrogance replaced by something more complicated. He had finished in third place, pushed down by Maya's performance, and for the first time in his racing career, he wasn't sure how to feel about it. Hey, he said, stopping a respectful distance away. Can we talk? Maya looked at him with the same calm steadiness she had shown before the race. We can talk. Garrett took off his helmet, revealing a face that looked older than it had that morning. Something about losing to someone you had dismissed tended to age a person quickly. I owe you an apology, he said. What I said before the race, about your bike, about you heading home, it was out of line. I've been racing long enough to know better. The track doesn't care about what you're riding, it cares about who's riding. That's true, Maya said, neither accepting nor rejecting the apology, just acknowledging it. Your grandfather was Raymond Johnson. I looked it up after the race. I'd heard stories about him from old-timers, but I never put the pieces together. He paused, struggling with words that didn't come naturally to him. He deserved better than what he got. And so do you. Maya was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Respect isn't about what people deserve. It's about what they earn. And I'm not looking for anyone's blessing or approval. I came here to race. I raced. Tomorrow I'll go home and work on my bike for the next event. That's all there is to it. Garrett nodded slowly, accepting the terms she was laying out. Then let me at least shake your hand, he said. Racer to racer. No more talk about museum pieces or going home early. Maya extended her hand. Garrett took it. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't friendship. It was simply acknowledgement. The beginning of respect that had been earned rather than assumed. As the Desert Kings walked away, one of them, a younger rider who hadn't spoken during the confrontation, turned back. Hey, he called out, that engine your grandfather built. What's the secret? Maya smiled for the first time all day. There's no secret, she said. Just 40 years of someone putting everything he had into something he loved. You can't buy that at a dealership. The documentary that Eleanor Price produced would go on to be viewed by over 2 million people in its first month. It told the story not just of the race, but of Raymond Johnson's legacy, the obstacles he faced, the victories he achieved, and the granddaughter who carried his dream forward. Maya Johnson returned to the Desert Thunder Rally the following year, and the year after that, and the year after that. She never won first place. That particular honor eluded her 4 times, but she never finished lower than third, and she did it every single time on the same bike her grandfather had built. The motorcycle itself became something of a legend. Younger riders would approach her at events, asking to see the engine, to hear its distinctive growl, to understand how something so old could still compete against machines that cost 10 times as much. Her answer was always the same. This bike isn't fast because of its parts. It's fast because of who built it and why. My grandfather put his soul into this engine. And souls don't rust. Souls don't break down. Souls don't care about what year they were born. If you're watching this and you know someone who needs to hear this story, someone who's been told their dream is impossible or their equipment isn't good enough, share this video with them. Sometimes we all need a reminder that respect is earned, not given. And sometimes we need proof that the things people laugh at have a way of surprising everyone. Began 6 months after the documentary's release, when Maya received a letter that would change everything. The envelope was hand-addressed, no return name, postmarked from Birmingham, Alabama. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in careful handwriting, along with a faded photograph that made Maya's breath catch in her throat. The photograph showed 2 young men standing beside a motorcycle, their arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera with the easy confidence of youth. One of them was her grandfather, easily recognizable despite being decades younger. The other was a white man she'd never seen before. The letter read, Dear Miss Johnson, my name is Harold Whitfield. I am 83 years old and I don't have much time left. The doctors have made that clear. But before I go, there's something I need to tell you. Something about your grandfather that I've been carrying for 55 years. Raymond and I were racing partners in 1968. We met at a small-town circuit in Nevada, both of us too young and too stubborn to know how the world was supposed to work. He was the best rider I'd ever seen, and I told him so. He looked at me like I was crazy, a white kid from Alabama telling a black man from California that he was better than everyone else on the track. But it was true, and we both knew it. We spent 3 years traveling together, entering every race we could find, sharing winnings and losses and everything in between. He was the closest thing to a brother I ever had. Then the 1971 season started and everything changed. I don't know if your grandfather ever told you about what happened in Phoenix. Probably not. He wasn't the type to dwell on painful things. But you deserve to know the truth, and I'm the only one left who can tell it. The Phoenix Desert Classic was supposed to be our breakthrough moment. The prize money was the biggest either of us had ever seen, and the sponsorship opportunities were real. Win that race, and doors would open that had always been closed. Raymond was the favorite. Everyone knew it. He had been winning small events all season, building a reputation that couldn't be ignored. And the people who wanted to keep things the way they were, the people who couldn't stand the idea of a black rider becoming a champion, they decided to make sure he never crossed that finish line. The night before the race, someone put sand in his gas tank. Not enough to be obvious, but enough to destroy his engine halfway through the course. He never finished. His bike seized at mile 32, and by the time he figured out what had happened, the race was over. I won that day. I accepted the trophy and the sponsorship money and the attention that should have been his. And I never told anyone what I suspected, that the victory I was celebrating was built on someone else's sabotage. Raymond knew. He never accused me directly, but he knew I had benefited from what they did to him. And eventually, he stopped returning my calls, stopped showing up at events where he knew I would be, just disappeared from my life like he had never been there. I have spent 55 years carrying the guilt of that silence. 55 years knowing that I should have spoken up, should have demanded an investigation, should have refused to accept a victory that wasn't earned fairly. But I was young and scared, and the world was different then. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth. I watched your documentary last week. My granddaughter showed it to me on her computer. I saw you riding Raymond's bike, and I heard you talking about his legacy, and I cried for the first time in 30 years. You deserve to know what was taken from him, and you deserve to know that at least one person remembers the truth, even if he was too cowardly to say it when it mattered. Your grandfather was the greatest rider I ever saw, and I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to make sure the world knew it. With deepest regret, Harold Whitfield. Maya read the letter 3 times. Then she sat in her kitchen for 2 hours, staring at the photograph of her grandfather and this stranger who had been his friend and then his silent witness to injustice. The anger came first. Rage at the people who had sabotaged the race. Rage at Harold for staying quiet. Rage at a system that had stolen her grandfather's chance at the recognition he deserved. But beneath the anger was something else. Something that felt almost like relief. For her entire life, she had wondered why her grandfather had stopped competing at the peak of his abilities. He had always deflected her questions, changing the subject or simply going quiet. Now she understood. The silence wasn't just disappointment. It was the wound of betrayal that had never fully healed. She picked up her phone and called the number at the bottom of the letter. A woman's voice answered. Young, professional. Whitfield residence. My name is Maya Johnson, she said. I received a letter from Harold Whitfield. I'd like to speak with him if he's available. A pause. Then, are you the woman from the documentary? The one with the motorcycle? Yes. Please hold. 2 minutes passed. Then a new voice. Old, frail, but alert. Miss Johnson, thank you for calling. I wasn't sure if you would. I wasn't sure if I would either, Maya admitted. But I have questions. I'll answer whatever I can. The people who sabotaged my grandfather's bike. Do you know who they were? A long pause. I have suspicions, but no proof. It was one of the racing officials, a man named Patterson, and maybe 1 or 2 of the other competitors. They made comments before the race, things that sounded like warnings, but nothing I could take to anyone. Are any of them still alive? Patterson died in 1989. The others, I don't know. I lost touch with that world a long time ago. Maya was quiet, processing. Miss Johnson, Harold continued, his voice even more fragile now. I know that nothing I say can make up for what happened, but I want you to know that I never spent the money from that race. Never used the sponsorship. I put it all in a trust and never touched it. Didn't feel like it was mine to spend. What happened to it? It's still there. Grown considerably over the years. I had my lawyer look into it after watching your documentary. After taxes and fees, it's worth about $400,000. Maya felt the world tilt slightly. I want to give it to you, Harold said. Not as payment for what was taken. Nothing can pay for that. But I don't know. As proof that at least one person tried to remember. Tried to make some kind of amends, even if it's 50 years too late. 2 weeks later, Maya Johnson flew to Birmingham. She spent 3 days with Harold Whitfield, listening to stories about her grandfather that she had never heard before. The races they had won together, the meals they had shared, the dreams they had talked about during long drives through empty countryside. Harold showed her photographs, racing records, newspaper clippings from small-town papers that had covered their early careers. Her grandfather smiled in almost every picture, a smile she had rarely seen in his later years, the smile of someone who still believed the world would eventually recognize his worth. On the third day, Harold handed her a check. I know money doesn't fix things, he said, but maybe it can help you carry his legacy forward in ways he never got to. Maya looked at the number written on the check. It was more money than she had ever seen in her life. What would you want me to do with it? She asked. Whatever honors Raymond's memory, Harold said. Start a racing school for young people who can't afford equipment. Fund a scholarship. Hell, build a museum. Just make sure his name is remembered. Maya nodded slowly. I think I know exactly what to do. Pause with me for a moment. If this story is hitting you in a way you didn't expect, take a second and comment the words, "Respect is earned." Let me know you're still here, still feeling this journey alongside Maya. It helps me know who's really connecting with these stories. The Raymond Johnson Racing Foundation was established 4 months later. Its mission was simple: to provide equipment, training, and support for young riders from underserved communities who wanted to compete in desert racing. Maya used the money Harold had given her, combined with proceeds from the documentary and donations from people who had been moved by her story, to purchase 20 motorcycles and lease a training facility in the California desert. The bikes weren't new. They were rebuilt classics, restored and modified by Maya herself, each one carrying a small plaque that read, "In the spirit of Raymond Johnson, ride with soul." The first class of students arrived in March of the following year. 12 young people, ages 14 to 20, from backgrounds that would have made competitive racing impossible without support. Some came from families that had never seen a motorcycle up close. Others had been riding for years, but couldn't afford the equipment needed to compete at higher levels. Maya taught them the way her grandfather had taught her, with patience, with precision, and with the understanding that the bike was only half the equation. Your machine is a tool, she told them on the first day. A very good tool if you treat it right. But the race happens here. She tapped her temple. And here. She touched her chest. If your head and heart aren't in it, no engine in the world will carry you across the finish line. The students listened with the intensity of people being given something they had never expected to receive. One of them, a 16-year-old named Deshaun from Oakland, raised his hand. Miss Johnson, people at my school say racing is a white sport, that there's no place for people who look like us. What do you say to that? Maya was quiet for a moment, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. I say that people who make those statements are working from incomplete information. They're looking at who's racing now and assuming that's who's supposed to be racing. But my grandfather was proving them wrong 50 years ago, and I'm proving them wrong today. And if you work hard enough and believe in what you're doing, you'll prove them wrong tomorrow. She paused, her eyes moving across the faces of her students. The track doesn't see color. The desert doesn't care where you come from. The only question that matters is whether you're willing to give everything you have. And if you are, if you truly are, then nothing can stop you except yourself. The first graduates of the Raymond Johnson Racing Foundation competed in regional events the following year. 2 of them placed in the top 10. One of them, a 17-year-old named Marcus, who had never seen a desert before coming to California, finished 3rd in the junior division of the Nevada State Championship. When he crossed the finish line, Maya was there to meet him. She didn't say anything at first, just wrapped him in a hug while the crowd cheered. You did it, she finally said. You showed them what you're made of. Marcus was crying, the tears of someone who had just achieved something they had been told was impossible. "Thank you," he managed. "Thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." Maya pulled back, looking him in the eyes. "I didn't give you anything except opportunity," she said. "The rest, the work, the sacrifice, the courage, that was all you. Never forget that. Never let anyone tell you that your success belongs to someone else." The media attention that followed was significant. News outlets that had ignored the foundation's launch suddenly wanted interviews, features, behind-the-scenes access. Eleanor Price, whose documentary had started the chain of events leading to this moment, produced a follow-up segment that was picked up by national networks. But the attention that mattered most to Maya came in the form of a letter, this one from a woman in Phoenix, Arizona. "Dear Miss Johnson, my name is Patricia Patterson. My father was Gerald Patterson, the racing official who Harold Whitfield mentioned in his letter to you. I want you to know that my father spent the last years of his life haunted by guilt over what he did to your grandfather in 1971. He never spoke about it directly, but I found his journals after he passed. They contained descriptions of what happened, the planning, the sabotage, the relief when it worked. Reading them was one of the most difficult experiences of my life. Learning that my father had deliberately destroyed another man's chance at success because of the color of his skin, I still haven't fully processed it. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. What was done can't be forgiven, and it's not my place to ask for absolution on behalf of someone who never sought it himself. I'm writing because I want you to know that the truth doesn't always stay buried. Sometimes it comes out, even decades later. And sometimes the children of those who did wrong have to carry that knowledge forward as a warning and a reminder. My father was wrong. What he did was cruel and cowardly and unjust. And if it means anything at all, I'm sorry. Not as an apology, because apologies can't fix this, but as an acknowledgement. An acknowledgement that what happened to Raymond Johnson was real and wrong and deserves to be remembered. Your foundation is a beautiful thing. I've donated to it anonymously several times, and I plan to continue doing so. If there's anything else I can do to support your work, please let me know. With respect and regret, Patricia Patterson. Maya shared the letter with Harold during one of their now regular phone calls. "How does it feel?" Harold asked. "Knowing the truth is finally coming out?" Maya considered the question. "It feels incomplete," she said honestly. "My grandfather never got to see this. Never got to hear the apologies or watch his foundation help young people follow their dreams. He died thinking the world had forgotten him, and no amount of truth-telling can change that. But his legacy lives on," Harold said, "through you, through those kids you're teaching, through everyone who watches that documentary and learns his name. That has to count for something." "It does," Maya admitted. "It counts for a lot. I just wish he could have been here to see it." "Maybe he can," Harold said softly. "Maybe that's what legacy means, seeing through the eyes of those who come after. Every time one of your students crosses a finish line, Raymond is there. Every time you ride his bike, he's there. The body might be gone, but the spirit finds ways to continue." Maya was quiet for a long moment. "You're getting philosophical in your old age," she finally said. "I'm getting philosophical because I don't have much time left to avoid it," Harold replied with a dry chuckle. "Might as well confront the big questions while I still can." The 5th anniversary of the Raymond Johnson Racing Foundation was marked by an event that surprised even Maya. The Desert Thunder Rally, the same race where she had first made her name, announced a special category, the Raymond Johnson Legacy Division. It would be open to riders on vintage equipment, motorcycles at least 25 years old, rebuilt and maintained by their owners rather than purchased off assembly lines. The announcement came with a statement from the rally's organizing committee. "For too long, desert racing has been defined by who has the most resources rather than who has the most skill. The Raymond Johnson Legacy Division is our attempt to change that, to honor a rider who was denied his rightful place in history and to create opportunities for others who might face similar barriers." Maya entered the race on her grandfather's bike. She was now 30 years old, still riding with the same technique he had taught her, still listening to the same engine he had built with his own hands. The competition was fierce. Riders from across the country had dug out vintage machines, restored them with love and skill, prepared them for the grueling desert course. The starting line looked like a museum exhibit come to life. beautiful old bikes lined up beside the sleek modern machines in the main race. This is a continuation of the story. The Raymond Johnson Legacy Division started 30 minutes before the primary event, giving spectators a chance to appreciate both the history and the present of desert racing. Maya took her position at the starting line. To her left was a woman on a restored 1982 Suzuki. To her right was a young man, one of her own students, now 20 years old, on a bike she had helped him rebuild over the course of 8 months. The horn sounded, and they were off. The course hadn't changed since her first race, but Maya had. She was more experienced now, more confident, more connected to the machine beneath her. Her grandfather's engine had been rebuilt twice over the years, each time by her own hands, each time with the same care he had originally invested. The first 20 miles passed in a blur of dust and adrenaline. Maya was running in third place, her student Marcus just ahead of her in second, the woman on the Suzuki leading by a comfortable margin. She didn't push to catch up. This race wasn't about winning. It was about proving that the past still had value, that skill and dedication could compete with money and machinery, that her grandfather's vision of what racing could be was still alive in the desert he had loved. At mile 45, something unexpected happened. Marcus's bike began to struggle. A sound emerged from his engine. A grinding, desperate sound that meant something crucial was failing. Maya watched as he slowed, then stopped, his race effectively over. She pulled alongside him, her own engine idling. "Go," Marcus said, waving her forward. "You can still catch her. Don't stop for me." Maya looked at him, this young man she had trained, whose dreams she had helped nurture, who was now facing the same crushing disappointment her grandfather had faced 50 years earlier. "Get on," she said. "What?" "Get on the bike. Behind me. We're finishing this together." "That's against the rules. They'll disqualify you." Maya smiled. "Then let them disqualify me. Some things are more important than prizes." Marcus hesitated for only a moment. Then he climbed onto the back of her grandfather's bike, wrapping his arms around her waist, adding his weight to a machine that had already carried so much. They crossed the finish line in last place, nearly 20 minutes behind the winner, but they crossed it together. And when they did, something remarkable happened. The crowd rose to its feet. Not just the people watching the Legacy Division, but everyone. Spectators, officials, riders from the main event who had stopped their preparations to watch. The applause started slowly and built into something thunderous, a wall of sound that echoed across the desert. Maya helped Marcus off the bike, then turned to face the crowd. She wasn't sure what to say, wasn't sure words could capture what had just happened. Then a voice came over the loudspeaker, Eleanor Price, who had been asked to provide commentary for the anniversary event. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you just witnessed isn't about racing. It's about what Raymond Johnson always believed, that the race isn't between the bikes. It's between the riders. And riders are made of something you can't buy at a dealership." Maya felt tears on her cheeks. She didn't try to hide them. The years that followed were kind to the foundation. Enrollment grew. Donations increased. Several of Maya's students went on to professional racing careers, carrying with them the lessons she had taught and the legacy she had preserved. Harold Whitfield passed away 3 years after the anniversary race. Maya was there at the end, holding his hand, listening to him talk about her grandfather in a voice that grew softer with each passing hour. "Tell him I'm sorry," Harold said near the end. "When you see him, tell him I spent 50 years wishing I could take it back." "He already knows," Maya said, "and I think he forgave you a long time ago." Harold smiled, a small, peaceful smile, and closed his eyes. Maya buried him next to his wife in Birmingham, then flew back to California to continue the work she had started. The guilt Harold had carried was released. The truth had been told. The rest was up to the living. On the 10th anniversary of the foundation, Maya was invited to speak at the National Motorcycle Hall of Fame. The occasion was the posthumous induction of Raymond Johnson, a recognition that had been half a century overdue. She stood at the podium, looking out at a crowd that included racing legends, industry executives, young riders who had grown up hearing her story and her grandfather's story intertwined. "My grandfather never wanted fame," she began. "He wanted fairness. He wanted the chance to compete on equal ground, to be judged by his skill rather than his skin, to ride his bike without wondering if someone was planning to sabotage his success. She paused, letting the words settle. He didn't get that chance. Not fully. The world he lived in wasn't ready for someone like him. But the world we're building, the world that starts with each of us making different choices, that world is ready. She held up a small object, a worn racing patch from her grandfather's original riding gear. This patch is 50 years old. It's faded and torn and held together by threads that should have given out decades ago. But it's still here. And that's what legacy means. Not the trophies or the records or the money. Legacy is the part of you that refuses to quit, even when the odds are impossible. It's the thing you leave behind that helps someone else keep going. She placed the patch on the podium, beside the plaque that would be installed in her grandfather's honor. Raymond Johnson was the greatest rider I ever knew. And today, finally, the world knows it too. If you watched this far, it's because this story meant something to you. Leave a comment saying, "I watched this far so I can get to know you, so I can know who really connects with these stories of courage and legacy." If this video moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's been told their dream is impossible. Someone who's fighting against obstacles that seem too big to overcome. And if you're not already subscribed, join this community. We tell stories about people who refuse to quit, people who prove that respect is earned, not given, and that greatness doesn't care about your circumstances. Raymond Johnson's bike still exists. It sits in a glass case at the National Motorcycle Hall of Fame, its faded paint and rusted frame preserved exactly as they were during Maya's final race. Visitors can read the plaque beside it, which tells the story of a man who built a legend with his hands and a woman who carried it forward with her heart. But the real legacy isn't in the museum. It's in the young riders who train at the foundation, learning that the race isn't about the bike. It's in the spectators who remember Maya's choice to finish last so she wouldn't leave her student behind. It's in every person who hears this story and decides that they too can prove something, not to the world, but to themselves. Some things are too important to measure in trophies. Some respect is too hard won to doubt, and some legacies are too powerful to ever truly end. Maya Johnson still rides every morning at sunrise, though her pace has slowed with age. She takes the same route her grandfather used to take, through the California desert, watching the light change as the day begins. Sometimes she talks to him during these rides. Not out loud, just in her head, sharing the silence with someone who understood it better than anyone. "They remember you now," she tells him. "They know what you built. They know what you gave." And in the sound of the engine, that distinctive growl he created 40 years ago, she imagines she can hear his answer. "Not me, us. They know what we gave." The desert doesn't care about trophies or money or fame. The desert only respects those who respect it. And somewhere in that vast expanse of sand and stone, Raymond Johnson's spirit still rides, carried forward by everyone who learned that respect isn't given. It's earned. 1 mile at a time. 1 race at a time. 1 generation at a time. Forever. The story of Maya Johnson and her grandfather spread beyond the racing world in ways neither of them could have anticipated. Schools began teaching about Raymond Johnson in history classes, using his story as an example of perseverance against systematic barriers. Universities invited Maya to speak about resilience, about carrying forward the dreams of those who came before, about finding purpose in honoring legacy. But the impact that moved Maya most came in the form of letters, hundreds of them, then thousands, from people all over the world who had watched her documentary or read about her foundation. A woman in Brazil wrote about her father, who had been a mechanic his entire life and never received recognition for innovations he had developed. Reading about Raymond Johnson had given her the courage to document his contributions and submit them to engineering journals. A teenager in Japan wrote about struggling to pursue traditional archery, a sport dominated by families who had practiced for generations. Maya's story had convinced her to keep training, to prove that dedication could overcome pedigree. A retired veteran in Scotland wrote about his grandfather, who had been a pilot during World War II, but had been denied medals because of his heritage. He was now working to have those honors posthumously awarded. Each letter carried the same theme. Maya's story and Raymond's story had shown them that the past could be redeemed through the actions of the present. Maya kept every letter in boxes in her garage, next to the tools her grandfather had used to build his legendary engine. On difficult days, days when the Foundation's challenges seemed insurmountable, or when the weight of carrying forward someone else's dream felt too heavy, she would read through them, reminding herself why the work mattered. 20 years after her first race at the Desert Thunder Rally, Maya returned to the course one final time. She was 49 years old now, her reflexes slower, her body less willing to absorb the punishment of desert racing. But the Raymond Johnson Legacy Division had grown into one of the most prestigious vintage competitions in the country, and the organizers had invited her to participate in a ceremonial ride, one lap around the course, not racing against anyone, just completing a journey she had started 2 decades earlier. The crowd that gathered was the largest in the rally's history. Many of them were former students of the Foundation, now accomplished riders in their own right. Others were fans who had followed her story from the beginning. And scattered throughout were faces she didn't recognize, people drawn by something larger than racing, something that spoke to their own struggles and dreams. Maya mounted her grandfather's bike for the last time. The engine turned over immediately, that distinctive growl unchanged despite all the years and all the miles. She adjusted her helmet, took a deep breath, and began to ride. The desert had not changed. The same sand, the same rocks, the same brutal beauty that had tested her so many times. But Maya had changed. She was no longer the 19-year-old trying to prove herself, no longer the young woman carrying an impossible burden of legacy. She was simply someone who had done the work, faced the obstacles, and discovered that the journey was more important than any destination. She completed the lap in 37 minutes, roughly twice as long as her racing pace, and pulled across the finish line to a standing ovation that lasted for nearly 10 minutes. When she finally dismounted, her eyes were clear. The tears had come earlier, during the ride, private moments between herself and the desert and the ghost of her grandfather. A reporter approached, microphone extended, asking the question everyone wanted answered. "Maya, after everything you've accomplished, what do you want people to remember?" She considered the question carefully, the way she had learned to consider everything important. "I want them to remember that respect is earned," she said. "Not given, not inherited, not purchased. Earned, through work, through sacrifice, through showing up when it would be easier to stay home." She paused, looking out at the crowd, at the students she had trained, the riders she had inspired, the strangers who had found something meaningful in her story. "And I want them to remember that we don't carry legacy alone. Every person who comes after us carries a piece of everyone who came before. My grandfather is in this bike. He's in this foundation. He's in every young rider who crosses a finish line believing that they belong there." She placed her hand on the motorcycle's tank, feeling the warmth of the engine beneath the metal. Some things are too important to let die. Some stories are too powerful to stop telling. And some respect is too hard-won to ever doubt. The Raymond Johnson Racing Foundation celebrated its 25th anniversary with a gala that raised over $2 million for equipment and scholarships. Maya, now in her 50s, sat at the head table beside Marcus, her former student, now the foundation's executive director, and watched as a new generation of riders received recognition for their achievements. The keynote speaker was Deshaun, the young man from Oakland who had asked her about racial barriers on the first day of class. He was 39 now, a successful professional rider with multiple championships and a coaching career that had touched hundreds of lives. "When I first met Maya Johnson," he said, "I didn't know anything about her grandfather. Didn't know about the sabotage or the struggles or the decades of injustice. All I knew was that here was someone willing to invest in me when no one else would." He paused, his voice thickening with emotion. "That investment changed my life. Not just the training or the equipment or the opportunities, the belief. Someone believed I could do something I had never seen anyone like me do. And that belief became my foundation, literally and figuratively." He turned to face Maya directly. "Everything I've accomplished started with you taking a chance on a kid from Oakland who didn't know anything about desert racing. And everything the foundation has accomplished started with your grandfather building an engine in his garage and refusing to quit when the world told him he didn't belong." Deshaun raised his glass. "To Raymond Johnson, whose spirit still rides in every race. To Maya Johnson, whose work ensures that spirit will never be forgotten. And to everyone who has ever been told they can't, may this foundation always be proof that they can." The applause that followed was deafening. Maya accepted it with the same quiet grace she had always shown, neither seeking attention nor deflecting from the moment. She had learned over the years that accepting recognition was not about ego. It was about honoring the work, acknowledging the journey, and inspiring others to begin their own. When the gala ended and the guests departed, Maya walked alone to the parking lot where her truck waited. Mounted in the bed, secured under a protective cover, was her grandfather's motorcycle. She had stopped riding it years earlier. The bike was too valuable, too historically significant. But she couldn't bring herself to leave it behind. She climbed into the cab and started the engine, then sat for a moment in the quiet darkness. "We did it, Grandpa," she said softly. "We showed them what we're made of." The truck pulled out of the parking lot, carrying the motorcycle and its legacy into the night. The desert waited as it always had, patient and eternal. And somewhere in the sound of the engine, Raymond Johnson's spirit rode on, forever proving that respect is earned, forever carrying forward the dreams of those who came before. Forever. The final chapter of Maya Johnson's public life came at age 62 when she announced her retirement as the foundation's honorary chair. The organization had grown beyond anything she could have imagined. Training centers in 4 states, partnerships with professional racing leagues, a scholarship fund that had supported over 3,000 young riders. But Maya had always believed in passing the torch. "This foundation was never about me," she said at her retirement ceremony. "It was about creating something that would outlast any individual, something that would keep growing, keep helping, keep proving what's possible long after I'm gone." She handed the ceremonial leadership role to a woman named Jasmine Torres, a former student who had risen through the ranks to become the foundation's most successful graduate. Jasmine had won 2 national championships and founded her own riding school before returning to help lead the organization that had given her a start. "The hardest thing about legacy," Maya said, "is letting go. Trusting that what you've built is strong enough to continue without you. But I've seen what this foundation can do. I've seen the lives it's changed. And I know without any doubt, that the best chapters are still ahead." The audience applauded, but Maya wasn't finished. "I want to leave you with something my grandfather told me when I was 12 years old, sitting on his bike for the first time, terrified that I would fall." She paused, her voice steady despite the emotion beneath. He said, "The bike doesn't know you're scared. The desert doesn't know you're scared. The only one who knows is you. And that means you're the only one who gets to decide whether the fear wins or you do." And she looked out at the crowd, at the riders, the staff, the supporters, the next generation of dreamers who would carry the mission forward. Choose yourself. Every time. No matter what anyone says about your equipment or your background or your chances, choose yourself. The standing ovation lasted so long that Maya eventually had to raise her hand and ask people to sit down. Maya spent her retirement years in the California desert, in a small house not far from where she had grown up. She still rode occasionally, not her grandfather's bike, which now resided permanently in the Hall of Fame, but a modern machine that she handled with the same care and precision she had learned decades earlier. Every morning, she would take a cup of coffee onto her porch and watch the sun rise over the landscape that had shaped her life. The desert hadn't changed. The same sand, the same silence, the same brutal honesty that demanded respect from anyone who dared to cross it. Visitors came often. Former students, reporters working on anniversary pieces, young writers seeking advice. Maya welcomed them all, sharing stories and lessons, and the quiet wisdom that comes from a life lived with purpose. One visitor stood out from the rest. She was a young woman, perhaps 18 years old, with a determined set to her jaw and calluses on her hands that spoke of hours spent working on machinery. "My name is Destiny Williams," she said. "My grandmother knew your grandfather. They raced together once, back in 1970, before everything happened in Phoenix." Maya invited her inside, intrigued. Destiny produced a photograph, faded and worn, showing a group of riders at a small-town circuit. Among them were 2 young black competitors, Raymond Johnson and a woman Maya didn't recognize. "That's my grandmother Lorraine," Destiny said. "She was one of the only black women racing in that era. She and your grandfather used to encourage each other, share tips, watch each other's backs." Maya studied the photograph, seeing her grandfather as a young man, surrounded by people whose names history had forgotten. "What happened to her?" Maya asked. "Same thing that happened to a lot of them. Pushed out, overlooked, forgotten." Destiny's voice carried no bitterness, only resolution. "But I found her journals after she passed. She wrote about your grandfather constantly. Called him the best writer she ever saw, said if anyone deserved to be remembered, it was him." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small leather-bound book. "I want to donate these to the foundation. Her journals, her story, so that when people learn about Raymond Johnson, they also learn about the community that surrounded him, the people who lifted each other up when no one else would." Maya accepted the journals with reverence, turning the pages carefully, reading words written by someone whose struggles mirrored her grandfather's. "This is incredible," she said softly. "This expands everything we thought we knew." "That's what I was hoping," Destiny said. "My grandmother deserved to be remembered too, they all did. And maybe this is how we make sure they are." The journals became the centerpiece of a new exhibit at the Foundation's headquarters, The Forgotten Racers. It documented not just Raymond Johnson's story, but the stories of dozens of others, Black riders, Latino riders, women riders, who had competed against impossible odds in an era that tried to erase them. The exhibit drew visitors from around the world. Researchers discovered new information about racers who had been written out of history. Families found photographs of ancestors they had never known competed. A community of forgotten dreamers was finally, decades later, being remembered. Maya attended the exhibit's opening, walking through the displays with tears in her eyes. There was her grandfather, of course, his story told with the depth and respect it deserved. But surrounding him were faces she had never seen before, other fighters, other dreamers, other people who had refused to quit even when the world demanded that they do. "This is what legacy really means," she said to Destiny, who stood beside her. "Not one person, not one story, a whole community, lifting each other up, passing forward what they learned." Destiny nodded, her eyes bright with the same fire Maya had felt at her age. "And it doesn't end here," Destiny said. "This is just the beginning." Maya smiled, a full, genuine smile that carried the weight of everything she had experienced and everything she had overcome. "You're right," she said. "It is just the beginning." She looked around the exhibit one more time, at all the faces who had been forgotten and were now remembered, at all the stories that had been silenced and were now being told. But what a beginning it is. Maya Johnson passed away peacefully in her sleep at age 78, surrounded by family and friends in the house she had lived in for 30 years. Her funeral was attended by over 2,000 people, former students, fellow riders, complete strangers who had been touched by her story. The ceremony was held in the desert she had loved, beneath a sky so blue it seemed to stretch into forever. Jasmine Torres delivered the eulogy. "Maya taught us that respect is earned," she said. "Not through words, but through actions. Not through expectations, but through proof. She spent her entire life proving what was possible, not for herself, but for everyone who would come after." She paused, looking out at the crowd gathered under the desert sun. "The foundation she built will continue. The stories she preserved will be told. The legacy she carried forward will never be forgotten." Because that's what Maya understood better than anyone. We don't leave this world with what we accumulate. We leave with what we pass on. Jasmine raised her hand in a final salute, a gesture Maya had taught her, borrowed from Raymond Johnson, who had borrowed it from the writers who came before him. "Rest now, Maya, you've earned it." The crowd echoed the salute, 2,000 hands rising toward the sky. And somewhere in the sound of the wind across the desert, in the memory of engines roaring and tires gripping sand, the spirits of all the forgotten racers rode together at last. Free, remembered, eternal. At the biker race they laughed, "That bike won't last." But what that black girl proved about respect would silence every doubter in ways none of them expected. And now, decades later, the silence has become a song of courage, of persistence, of refusing to quit. A song that will never stop playing, a legacy that will never die. Respect is earned. Maya Johnson proved it. And so can you.